Sophia clutched a worn-out leather bag against her chest, trying to ignore the stares of the people around her. The line at the bank stretched long, but it felt as though time had come to a halt. Her hands were shaking, the edges of her deposit slip crinkling slightly as she gripped it tighter. Every step felt heavier than the last as she neared the counter. She felt like she was under a microscope. Her faded sweater and scuffed shoes stood in stark contrast to the polished outfits around her. The other customers seemed to have money to spare, their high-end watches glinting in the fluorescent lights, their expensive perfumes filling the air. She was just another face in the crowd to them, someone who didn't quite belong. Someone who didn't matter. But today, she had no choice. She had to be here. She had no other options. The manila envelope in her hand was more than just a simple deposit, it held everything she had left, her savings. If she didn't deposit it, she didn't know what would happen. It was her last chance. Sophia stepped forward to the counter, her heart pounding. She could feel the eyes of the line behind her on her back, the whispers growing louder as she fumbled with the envelope. The young clerk behind the counter barely glanced up at her. He was flipping through his phone, clearly uninterested in the next customer. When he finally acknowledged her, it was with the slightest flick of his eyes, his face completely unreadable. "What can I help you with today?" he asked, his voice condescendingly polite, but with a noticeable edge to it. He didn't seem to care what she had to say, and it made her stomach tighten. Sophia swallowed hard, trying to push down the nervous lump in her throat. I need to deposit this," she said, sliding the envelope across the counter, her voice shaking slightly. The clerk glanced at the envelope, his eyes narrowing as he pulled it closer to him. He opened it, inspecting its contents with exaggerated care, then looked back at her. "Is this all you're depositing?" he asked, his tone now dripping with disbelief. "This is a pretty small amount for our bank, you know." Sophia felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her gaze steady, refusing to let him see how much his words were cutting into her. She had worked for every penny in that envelope, and it felt like the one thing she could still hold on to. But here he was, belittling it. "It's all I have left," she said quietly, willing him to understand, but knowing he never would. To him, it was just a small amount. To her, it was everything. The clerk's smirk deepened as he flipped through the deposit slip. "You sure you're in the right place?" he asked, voice louder now. "Maybe you should try the community bank down the road. They deal with smaller deposits like this." A few people in line snickered. Sophia's hands trembled as she stared at the clerk. His words felt like a slap in the face. She was used to people looking down on her, but this was different. This felt personal. She was nobody to them, just a woman with a small deposit and an even smaller life. "Please," she whispered, trying to keep her composure. "I just need to deposit this. It's all I have." The clerk's laughter died in his throat as he glanced up and saw the desperation in her eyes. But instead of softening, his gaze hardened. He turned to his coworker, a middle-aged woman with perfectly curled hair, and shook his head. "Can you believe this? She really thinks she can come here and make a deposit like this." The woman snorted and muttered something under her breath. Sophia felt her face burn with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "I really just need to deposit this." But before the clerk could respond, a voice interrupted them. Deep and commanding, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Is there a problem?" Sophia froze, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. The voice was familiar, too familiar. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The tone was unmistakable. She would know it anywhere. She turned slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. The man who had just walked in was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an impeccable dark suit. The contrast between his refined appearance and the worn-down walls of the bank couldn't have been starker. He looked like a figure straight out of a magazine, exuding an aura of power and control that made every head in the room turn in his direction. People stopped whispering. Even the clerk, who had been so quick to mock her just seconds earlier, now looked up in stunned silence. The man stepped forward, his sharp gaze sweeping over the room before landing on Sophia. There was something protective in the way he looked at her, as if he could feel the weight of her humiliation. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but only she would have noticed. "What's going on here?" he asked again, his voice firm but not unkind. The clerk fumbled with his words, clearly rattled. Nothing, sir. Just a minor issue with a deposit. We were trying to help this lady, but..." The man's eyes flicked to the envelope on the counter. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black card. It was just a card, but to anyone who knew anything about banking, they would recognize the logo. It was a symbol of wealth and privilege, something that couldn't be bought, only earned. He placed the card down on the counter, the click of it against the marble echoing through the room. The air felt heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath. "I'll take care of it," the man said calmly, his gaze never leaving the clerk's face. "Transfer $10 million into her account. Right now." The clerk's mouth opened and closed in disbelief, his face draining of color. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse right there on the floor. His hands trembled as he tried to make sense of what had just been said. "Why, you can't be serious," he stammered, glancing at his supervisor for help. The supervisor was still too shocked to speak. The other customers stood frozen, unsure of what to make of the situation. All eyes were now on Sophia, who was struggling to process what was happening. Her mind spun in a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. $10 million? What was going on? Who was this man? The clerk's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he couldn't seem to make a move. His fear was palpable, his mind clearly trying to wrap around what was happening. "I said now," the man repeated, his voice dropping an octave, hard and commanding. The tension in the air thickened. Sophia could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as the clerk scrambled to input the transfer. His fingers shook so violently that he nearly missed the keys. For a moment, Sophia thought he might drop dead right there from the sheer pressure. "Is this really necessary?" the clerk mumbled, still not fully grasping the situation. "I'm just doing my job." The man cut him off sharply. "It's necessary, and you'll finish it. Right now." Sophia couldn't speak. She couldn't even process what was happening. This man was clearly here for her, but why? She didn't know him, not like that. They had never met. So why was he stepping into her life, into this moment of humiliation, and turning everything upside down? And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get more bizarre, the doors to the bank opened again. This time, a woman entered. She was tall, dressed in a sharp red dress that stood out against the backdrop of the bank's dull decor. She walked with purpose, her eyes locked on the man at the counter as if she had no time to waste. She carried a folder in her hands, and Sophia could feel the weight of it even from across the room. It was more than just paper, it was a symbol of something hidden, something powerful. The woman's expression was cold, focused. She walked straight toward the counter, the sound of her heels echoing through the now silent room. Sophia felt her heart race. This woman had something to do with everything. She just didn't know how. The man turned to the woman, but didn't speak. His eyes flickered to Sophia, then back to the woman. There was a brief, almost imperceptible nod between them. The woman handed the folder to the man, and for the first time, Sophia saw a flicker of emotion pass across his face, something like, regret? No, it was too quick, too fleeting. He opened the folder with careful fingers. Sophia felt a knot form in her stomach. What was inside it? What was happening? "Why now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She had to know. She had to understand what was going on. The man turned to her slowly. His eyes softened, but there was a steely resolve behind them. Because it's time. Before she could ask another question, a low, deep voice interrupted. Everything changes now, Sophia. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. This was no longer just about money. This was something much bigger than anything she could have imagined. Sophia's pulse raced as the words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on her chest. Everything changes now, Sophia. She stared at the man in front of her, unable to comprehend what was happening. He was tall, imposing, and radiated an aura of confidence that sent a shiver down her spine. His gaze softened for just a second, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside her. This wasn't some ordinary encounter, it felt like the beginning of something much bigger, something she hadn't expected. The woman in the red dress had already walked over to the desk, talking to the clerk now. The whole atmosphere in the bank had shifted. What had been a space of uncomfortable silence moments before now buzzed with tension. But still, there was something too strange about all of this. Sophia could feel it deep in her gut. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice coming out shaky, though she tried to maintain a semblance of control. The man's eyes flickered with something, recognition, perhaps. But it was quickly gone, replaced by the same unreadable look. He stepped closer to her, just enough that she could smell his cologne, a subtle but distinct scent of something expensive, something that made her feel even more out of place. "I think you already know me," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "But there are a lot of things you don't understand. Yet." She didn't know what to make of his words. Her mind was spinning, but nothing about this felt right. She wasn't the kind of woman who rubbed elbows with people like him. Her life had always been simple, routine, predictable. Yet here she was, in a bank that felt more like a stage for some bizarre performance, surrounded by people who were all watching her. "Please. I don't understand," she said, shaking her head, feeling her voice crack. The last shred of control she had was slipping away. "I don't know you. Who are you to make this kind of decision for me?" He paused, his eyes scanning her face as if measuring her every word, every thought. Then, slowly, his lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I am someone who cares. Someone who knows what you've been through. But we'll talk about that later." Sophia didn't know what to say. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She had spent so long keeping her life under wraps, hiding the true depths of her struggle. She had thought that no one would ever care, and yet, here was this stranger, this man, seemingly stepping into her life as if he had the right to control it. The clerk, still looking shell-shocked, finally managed to regain some composure. "Yes, sir. Everything is in order. The transfer is going through," he said, his voice cracking under the pressure. "But I must insist we double-check this." His hands were trembling as he typed something into the computer, but he didn't dare challenge the man any further. The woman in the red dress, meanwhile, hadn't moved an inch from the counter. She seemed completely calm, as though everything were normal. But Sophia could see that she was watching them. Her eyes never left the man, a knowing expression on her face. "I can't," the clerk started to say, but the man raised a hand, silencing him immediately. "Don't worry," the man said, his tone still eerily calm. "It's done. The money is on its way." The clerk hesitated for a moment, then nodded and turned back to his computer screen, his fingers moving mechanically now. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that matched the tension in the air. For the first time since Sophia had walked into this place, the situation felt real. But she still couldn't make sense of it. The man turned back to her, his gaze softer now, though still intense. "I'm not here to make things more difficult for you," he said, his voice carrying an edge of sincerity. "I'm here to help." Sophia opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, the doors of the bank opened again, and in walked a man who looked like he belonged in a high-end suit commercial. He wasn't as tall as the first man, but his presence was just as commanding. The newcomer walked straight toward the counter, his eyes darting quickly over the situation as if he had already assessed everything. "Status?" the man asked in a smooth, authoritative voice, addressing the woman in the red dress. "Everything's in place," she replied without looking at him. Her focus was entirely on the man in front of her. "We're ready to proceed." The newcomer nodded, his eyes never leaving the man who had helped Sophia. There was a tension between the two, a silent battle of wills that Sophia couldn't quite understand. Sophia felt a chill sweep through her. Who are these people? Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the puzzle. The man in the suit, the woman in red, the sudden appearance of the billionaire-looking stranger, they all felt connected in some way. But how? And why her? The man in the suit turned back to Sophia, his eyes narrowing as he took a step toward her. "I'm sure you have many questions," he said, his voice colder than the first man's. "But right now, you need to focus on one thing, the money." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. The money. The $10 million. Was this real? Or had she fallen into some kind of trap? "Why? Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to know you," the man said flatly. "I know what you need. And I'm here to give it to you." The sudden bluntness of his words struck Sophia to her core. She felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, her mind struggling to find the right words. Before she could respond, the first man, who had stood silently by her side, spoke up again, his voice steady but with an undeniable force. "She doesn't need to know everything right now. But what she does need to understand is that her life is about to change. And it won't be easy." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sophia felt like she was drowning in them. She had no idea who this man was, why he was there, or how he had the power to change her life so drastically. But one thing was certain, she was about to be dragged into something that she wasn't ready for. Something much bigger than herself. "Do you trust me?" the man asked her, his eyes locking with hers. There was no hesitation in his voice. He wasn't asking for her approval. He was making a statement. Sophia swallowed hard, her mind still reeling. Could she trust him? After everything that had happened? After the mocking clerk, the weird transfer of money, and the mysterious people who had entered her life in an instant? She didn't have an answer. She didn't even know what the question truly meant. "Everything will make sense soon enough," the first man said, reading her thoughts. "For now, just know this, your life isn't what you think it is. You've been living in a shadow, but now the truth is coming for you." Sophia stood there, frozen. The room felt like it was closing in on her. Was this real? Was she really standing in a bank, surrounded by strangers, talking about $10 million as if it were just another Tuesday? The tension in the room was palpable. The woman in red still hadn't moved, her eyes flicking between the two men, clearly awaiting some unspoken signal. The clerk had finally finished his work and was now standing quietly to the side, completely lost in the chaos unfolding in front of him. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the man in the suit and the woman in red turned to leave, their business done. The woman glanced at Sophia once more, her eyes sharp, before they both exited the bank without a word. Sophia was left alone with the man who had changed everything for her. The one who had come out of nowhere, seemingly to offer her a life she could never have dreamed of. Before she could speak again, he looked at her, his face unreadable. "Come with me," he said simply. "Your new life is about to begin." And with that, everything she knew, everything she had believed, crumbled. Sophia's legs felt like jelly as she followed the man through the narrow corridors of the bank. The suddenness of everything, the money, the strange billionaire, the cryptic words he'd said, left her reeling. It felt like she was walking in a dream, and in her gut, she had a sinking feeling that she would wake up to something far worse than the twisted reality she was living in now. She didn't speak as they moved past the rows of glass offices, and the murmurs of the employees faded into the background. The man in front of her didn't seem to notice her nervousness. His strides were sure, his back straight, as though he were walking toward an inevitable fate. And yet, his silence made her more anxious. Why wasn't he talking? Why didn't he tell her what was going on? Was this all some kind of sick game? The door at the end of the hallway opened with a soft whoosh, and she stepped into a luxurious office that could have belonged to someone out of a business magazine. Expensive leather chairs, glass tables, and shelves lined with thick books that looked more like a trophy collection than anything else. Sophia couldn't help but glance around. This is not real, she thought. This can't be happening to me. Sit, the man said, his voice as commanding as ever, his eyes never leaving her. He motioned toward a chair opposite the desk, where a massive view of the city spread before her. The skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun, and for a brief moment, she felt as if she had entered another world, a world that wasn't her own. She sat down slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. She wanted answers. She needed them. But this man had already shown her that nothing was what it seemed. She didn't know what to believe, but she knew one thing for certain: she was trapped in a web she didn't understand. The man sat behind the desk, the plush leather chair creaking as he settled in. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable, before pushing a document toward her. She eyed it warily, the same feeling of dread swirling in her stomach. "I need you to sign this," he said, his tone so final, so matter-of-fact, that it took all her willpower to not snap at him. "It's a formality. Nothing to worry about." "Nothing to worry about?" Sophia's eyes darted to the fine print, her brain working overtime to process the words. But before she could begin to read, his voice interrupted her again, sharp and impatient. "Do you remember the day you went to the bank?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that it caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to shift the conversation. But there was something in his gaze, a hint of calculation, that made her hesitate. I remember. But I don't understand any of this. What do you want from me?" The man folded his arms across his chest, his eyes narrowing just a little. "What I want is simple. You have a role to play in this, whether you like it or not." Sophia's mind raced. "A role? What are you talking about?" He leaned forward, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. "You're a part of something much bigger than you realize. The money you saw, $10 million, it wasn't just for you. It's part of something much larger, something that's been in the works for years." Sophia's throat went dry. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I don't understand. I'm just an ordinary woman. What could I possibly have to do with this?" The man smiled, though it wasn't a comforting smile. It was more like a cat playing with its prey before the final strike. "That's what you think. But let me tell you something, Sophia. Your life has never been ordinary. It never has been. And that's exactly why you're here now." Her heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room seemed to close in on her as she stared at him, at the cold, calculating way he was looking at her. The man's eyes didn't soften. He wasn't trying to reassure her or comfort her. He was giving her a piece of the puzzle, but only the smallest, most cryptic part. "This isn't just about the money," he continued. "It's about power. Influence. Control. Your life, Sophia, is about to become entangled in a world you never thought you'd be a part of. And I'm here to make sure you understand that." Sophia felt the weight of his words like a physical force. They seemed to press down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her thoughts spiraled. She was just a woman from an ordinary town. How could she possibly have a role in any of this? Why me? She whispered, her voice trembling. Why would you want to bring me into this? I don't even know what this is. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a thin file. He slid it toward her, and without looking at her, he spoke again. Read it. Sophia took the file reluctantly. She could feel the weight of it in her hands, like it held the answers to questions she wasn't sure she wanted to ask. She opened it slowly, flipping through the pages, each one more bizarre than the last. There were bank statements, charts, and pictures she didn't recognize. But one thing stood out, the name Sophia Keller. Her name was written on a document detailing millions of dollars in transactions. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the date. The date when she had supposedly signed documents she had never seen before. This is a mistake, she stammered, her fingers trembling as she pointed to the papers. I never signed anything like this. The man's eyes flicked up at her for the first time. His expression softened, but only for a brief moment. Do you think this is a mistake? Do you really believe that? Sophia felt a wave of panic rising in her chest. Her mind was spinning, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in a way that made her feel like the ground was falling out from under her. She had no idea what any of this meant, but she knew one thing: the life she thought she knew was over. The man's words, his actions, they all pointed to a terrifying truth she wasn't ready to face. I don't know what to believe anymore, she whispered. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. You don't need to believe me. Not yet. But everything you see here, everything that's happening right now. It's not a coincidence. And I'm not the only one who's been watching you, Sophia. You're a part of a much larger story. And the moment you signed that bank slip, you became part of something that will change your life forever. Sophia's stomach churned. She couldn't take it. It was too much. She had never asked for any of this. She had never wanted anything beyond a simple, peaceful life. And now, here she was, sitting in front of a man who was telling her she had been chosen for something she didn't understand. I want out, she said, her voice gaining strength as she stood up from the chair. I don't care about any of this. I just want to go back to my life. The man's eyes narrowed, but he didn't rise to stop her. He didn't need to. He knew she wasn't going anywhere. You can't leave, he said quietly. Not now. You've already signed your name on the dotted line. This isn't just about money. It's about your place in something far larger. Your actions have consequences, Sophia. You can't simply walk away from this. She froze, her hand on the door handle. What are you saying? He smiled, though the smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm saying you're in deeper than you realize. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences. Sophia stood frozen at the door, the weight of his words sinking in. She had no idea how long she stood there, but the silence that followed felt deafening. The man's voice, so calm and assured, continued to echo in her head, telling her she couldn't walk away, that there was no turning back now. Her fingers curled tightly around the handle. She didn't want to face this. She didn't want to confront whatever terrifying reality had just been thrust upon her. But there was something deep inside her, a flicker of something fierce, that wouldn't let her leave. She turned back around, her mind racing, her heart pounding harder than ever. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What is this all about? Why are you doing this to me? The man sat in his chair, looking at her with the same cold detachment as before. He didn't answer right away, but the silence in the room was thick with anticipation, as though every second was stretching toward some unknown conclusion. You really don't understand, do you? He said finally, his voice still as calm as ever. You never did, and that's exactly why you're here now. Sophia shook her head, her mind reeling. I'm just a simple woman. I don't belong in any of this. You've got it all wrong. I never signed any documents, I don't know what you're talking about. His eyes narrowed, but there was no anger there, only a sharp, calculating intensity. You might believe that, but what you need to understand is that none of this is about what you think it is. It's about who you are. And who you're meant to become. She flinched at the weight of his words. Meant to become? What do you mean by that? The man didn't answer her directly. Instead, he pushed a different set of documents across the desk, his fingers trailing over them slowly. This isn't just about money, Sophia. It's about legacy. It's about power. And most importantly, it's about connections you've had since the day you were born. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. What was he talking about? She had no idea what kind of connections he was referring to. She was just, her. Ordinary. Unremarkable. So why was she being dragged into this tangled web of wealth, secrets, and power? Connections, she repeated, her voice shaking. What do you mean? What's this all about? The man paused, then stood up. For the first time, there was a faint trace of something like pity in his eyes. You've been kept in the dark for so long, haven't you? Your entire life has been built on lies, Sophia. And today, you'll finally understand the truth. Sophia took a step back, panic rising in her chest. Lies? What lies? What do you mean? He took a deep breath, his face expressionless. It's time you knew the truth. Your husband, Peter Keller, he's not just a wealthy businessman. He's part of something much larger than you could ever imagine. Something that connects him to powerful people all around the world. And you've been a part of that world, whether you knew it or not. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard of anything like this. Peter had always been a quiet, private man. He had never mentioned anything like this to her, and she had always assumed he was just a simple, albeit rich, businessman. But now, hearing the words from this man's lips, a strange fear crept up her spine. Was this the man's way of trying to manipulate her? Was he trying to control her by using her husband's name? Peter? What does he have to do with all of this? She demanded, her voice trembling. The man's lips twitched in something that could have been a smile. Your husband, Sophia, isn't just a man with money. He's part of a legacy that has been building for decades. A legacy that goes back far further than you could ever guess. And your role in this, is crucial. Sophia felt as if the world had just been ripped from beneath her feet. She had always known Peter was different, but she never thought his secrets would stretch this far. But the man wasn't finished. He stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. Peter made a decision years ago, he continued, his voice darkening. A decision that changed everything. He knew the world was moving toward a shift, a new era. And in that new era, only those who held power, wealth, and influence would have a say in how things were done. Your husband, he's been a key player in this shift. Sophia stared at him, unable to speak. The truth was too overwhelming, too incomprehensible. But she needed to know. She needed to understand. What do you mean, a new era? She asked, almost choking on the words. And what does that have to do with me? The man smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. You're part of it, Sophia. You always have been. Peter's wealth, his connections, and his influence, those things are nothing compared to what he's truly after. And you are the key. Sophia's mind reeled. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the desk, trying to steady herself. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't her life. She was just an ordinary woman, wasn't she? I don't understand, she whispered, more to herself than to him. I don't understand any of this. Why me? The man's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw something like compassion in his eyes. Because, Sophia, Peter didn't just marry you because you were beautiful or kind. He married you because of who you are. Because of your bloodline. Your family. Sophia's heart stopped. Her bloodline? She had no idea what he was talking about. She was just a woman from a small town, with no special family connections, no royal heritage. There had to be some mistake. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's impossible. My family is nobody. We're ordinary people. The man's gaze never wavered. That's what you've been led to believe. But your family's origins go back much further than you realize. Your father, for instance, he was no ordinary man. He had a role to play in this world, a role that he passed on to you. Sophia recoiled, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with terrifying clarity. Her mind raced, but she couldn't keep up. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. And then, the door behind them opened. Sophia whipped around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway was Peter. But he wasn't the man she recognized. His usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by something colder, something darker. His eyes locked on hers, and for a brief moment, Sophia saw something in them that terrified her more than anything else: regret. Peter? She whispered, her voice breaking. He stepped into the room slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He looked older, weary, like he had been carrying a burden for too long. And then, without saying a word, he took a seat next to her. "It's true," he said softly, his voice raw with emotion. "Everything he's told you. Everything you've heard, it's all true." Sophia's heart clenched. "No. No, it can't be. I don't believe you." Peter reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "I never wanted you to find out like this. But I couldn't keep it from you anymore. The world we live in, it's not what it seems. And the life we've had, the one we've built, it was all part of something much larger than either of us." Her mind was spinning, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from him. She wanted to scream, to shout, to demand that he tell her everything, but the words stuck in her throat. This was the man she loved, the man who had always been so kind to her. And yet, here he was, confessing to things she couldn't even begin to understand. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Peter's face twisted with guilt. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Sophia. I wanted to protect you. But I see now. I see now that I should have told you everything." He looked at the man who had been watching them quietly. "It's time, isn't it?" The man nodded. "Yes, it's time. She's ready now." Sophia looked back at Peter, her mind reeling with the enormity of everything. "What is this? What have you done?" Peter's voice was soft but firm. "I've done what I had to do. I'm sorry it had to be like this, but the world is changing, Sophia. The world is changing, and we have a choice. We can either be part of it, or we can be left behind." Sophia closed her eyes, her head spinning with 1,000 thoughts. The life she had known, was it ever real? Had it all been a lie? And then, for the first time, Peter looked at her with something more than regret. He looked at her with hope. "You're ready, Sophia. You always have been."